The piercing wee-oo of a police siren tore through the quiet morning, then cut off with a sickening crunch. I dropped my mug and sprinted outside. There it was, the county sheriff's cruiser flattened beneath the massive trunk of my oak tree. Smoke curled from the hood, blue lights still flashing weakly under the weight of splintered wood. And standing beside the wreck, hands on her head, was Deborah Frost, our self-appointed HOA queen, the same woman who had ordered that very tree chopped down just hours earlier. Her pink blazer was streaked with sawdust and disbelief. I didn't have to say a thing. The scene spoke for itself. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of timing. That was the moment our little neighborhood war went from ridiculous to legendary. Before I tell you how an HOA president's arrogance turned into a full-blown scandal, drop a comment with your location and local time, and make sure to subscribe. You're not going to believe what came next. You'd think after a tree crushed the sheriff's cruiser, people would realize maybe, just maybe, messing with nature wasn't such a bright idea. But this all started long before that morning, back when the oak was still standing tall in my backyard, and HOA President Deborah Frost still believed her clipboard could bend reality. When I first moved to Oakview Hills, I thought I'd found peace. I'm a landscape architect by trade, a man who spends his days designing parks, restoring wetlands, making things grow. That old oak had stood there for nearly a century, roots sunk deep into the clay branches shading 3 backyards. It wasn't just a tree, it was history. It anchored the hillside, held the soil, kept the runoff from flooding Deborah's precious rose garden. I used to joke that it had been here longer than any HOA and would outlive them all. That was before Deborah took office. Now, if you've never lived under a true HOA, Karen, let me paint the picture. Blonde highlights too sharp for her age, a collection of pastel blazers that could blind a camera lens, a personality that could turn a block party into a courtroom hearing, and the voice, oh that voice, sharp nasal and powered by a sense of authority granted by a laminated badge that simply read HOA President. The previous president, Mr. Grayson, had been fair, logical. He believed in rules but also in reason. Deborah, on the other hand, believed in control. Within her first month, she banned basketball hoops, flagged mailboxes that didn't match the approved shade of taupe, and sent a written warning to a widow for having a visibly cheerful wind chime. So I wasn't surprised when she eventually found her way to my oak tree. It started one Tuesday morning with a letter taped to my front door, official HOA letterhead, printed in her signature Comic Sans. Violation notice, unapproved vegetation structure. Section 3.4. Tree obstructs uniform sightline from curb and may impact property value. I laughed out loud. Unapproved vegetation structure. I wasn't even mad yet. I thought it was a mistake. I walked across the street, letter in hand, to her pristine lawn where she was watering petunias like she owned the county. Morning, Deborah, I said. Looks like there's been some mix-up. You sent me a violation notice for my oak. She squinted over her sunglasses like I was interrupting royal business. Not a mix-up. That tree breaks the uniform elevation line from the road. We're standardizing the neighborhood's visual symmetry. I blinked. Visual symmetry. It's a 90-year-old oak, not a billboard. It blocks the view of the Frost residence, she said, gesturing grandly toward her own house as if it were a national landmark. When prospective buyers drive through, first impressions matter, I smiled. You planning to sell? Her eyes narrowed. That's not relevant. What is relevant is compliance. That's when I realized this wasn't about the tree, it was about control. So I did what any rational adult would do when confronted by suburban tyranny. I documented everything. I took photos, called the county arborist, and pulled the original lot survey. That tree was grandfathered in long before the HOA even existed. According to the municipal code, it was protected under environmental conservation. The next day, I delivered a neatly stapled packet to her mailbox, along with a certified letter explaining that the HOA had no jurisdiction over protected vegetation. I even included a highlighted section of the ordinance just to be polite. For a week there was silence. I thought that was the end of it. Then she posted a photo of my backyard on the HOA's Facebook group with the caption, "Unsightly overgrowth threatening property values, let's discuss at the next meeting." Oh, the comments. You'd think I was harboring a swamp monster. Looks dangerous. Probably rotting inside. My allergies act up every time I walk by. Funny thing, I knew at least half those people hadn't been within 20 feet of my fence. But in an HOA, perception is reality. And Deborah knew how to weaponize gossip better than any attorney could weaponize precedent. A few nights later, I saw her outside with a flashlight, pacing near my yard like a detective at a crime scene. I stepped out onto my porch, and called "Need help finding your common sense." She didn't answer, just scribbled something on her clipboard and disappeared into the dark. The following morning, a second notice arrived. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in HOA action. That was the moment I knew this was going to escalate. I installed 2 new security cameras, one aimed at the oak, another covering the side yard. I even added a small sign. "Smile, Deborah. You're on camera. Petty maybe. Effective. Absolutely." But Deborah wasn't the type to be deterred by logic or lens. When you threaten a Karen's illusion of power, she doubles down. 3 days later, I heard the low hum of chainsaws in the distance. Not unusual for the neighborhood until I noticed the sound was too close. I opened my blinds and froze. 2 men in orange safety vests were standing by the base of my tree ropes and saws in hand. And there she was, Deborah Frost herself, hands on hips, barking orders like a foreman. I ran outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The older worker looked uncertain. "Ma'am said it's HOA-approved removal." "Got the form right here." I turned to Deborah. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." She lifted her clipboard like a sword. "Actually, Ethan Section 5 allows emergency action to remove hazardous vegetation. That tree leans toward my property. It's a risk." "Hazardous," I pointed to the trunk sturdy as a pillar. "You made that up." Her smirk could have curdled milk. "Then sue me." For a moment I considered calling the cops right there. But something in her tone, so smug, so certain, told me I needed evidence stronger than my word against hers. So I hit record on my phone and filmed everything. The workers, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated. "Ma'am, you sure?" "Yes," she snapped. "Cut it. Now." The chainsaws roared. My stomach turned. I could feel every vibration through the soil as they sliced into the bark. Branch by branch, the canopy that had shaded generations crashed to the ground. By the time they finished, it looked like a war zone, splintered limbs, torn roots, and Deborah standing proudly over the carnage like she'd slain a dragon. I walked up beside her, calm, steady, every muscle trembling. "You just broke county law." She laughed, brushing sawdust from her blazer. "No, Ethan. I saved the neighborhood. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just looked her in the eye and said, 'Then I hope you kept the receipt,' because I knew exactly what would happen next." See, that oak's roots weren't just holding up the hill behind my house, they were holding up hers. Without them, the slope would turn into soup after the next storm. And wouldn't you know it, the weather forecast showed heavy rain rolling in by the weekend. So I gathered my evidence, the video, the contractor's info, the date stamps, even her smug little quote, "Then sue me." And that's precisely what I planned to do. But the universe, it decided to act faster. Because just as I was finishing my report that night, thunder rolled across the sky like distant laughter. Rain started tapping on my windows, gentle at first, then heavier. The soil outside began to glisten, softening, shifting. And by dawn, let's just say Deborah Frost was about to learn that when you pull out roots literal or moral, you'd better be ready for the ground to give way beneath you. By Friday morning, the rain hadn't stopped for 12 hours straight. The gutters overflowed, the sky hung low and gray, and the soil behind our houses had turned into something between pudding and quicksand. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time thunder cracked, I could almost hear that empty patch of earth behind Deborah's property, sighing relieved of the roots that once held it steady. Around 7 a.m., I pulled on my raincoat and walked out back with a thermos of coffee. The air smelled like wet clay and sawdust. My oak well, what was left of it, stood like a decapitated giant, its trunk split and hollowed. I crouched near the stump and ran my hand over the rings. 93 years old, according to the arborist's report, Deborah had erased nearly a century in one afternoon of arrogance. The ground underfoot squelched, shifting slightly with every step. That's when I saw it, a hairline crack running down the slope behind her property, stretching toward her patio. Not big yet, but deep enough to whisper trouble. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and took several photos time-stamped and geotagged. I knew I'd need them soon. At 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sheriff Brad Hanlon standing there, broad-shouldered, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, looking as if someone had dragged him from a golf game. He was the kind of man who always carried the faint smell of cologne and entitlement, a longtime friend of Deborah's late husband, and an occasional guest at her wine nights. "Mornin', Ethan," he said half-friendly. "We got a report of a dispute over property damage." "Yeah," I said flatly. "You might want to talk to your friend across the street. She had my protected oak cut down without permission." Brad rubbed his chin. "She claims it was a safety hazard." I raised an eyebrow. And she's an arborist now. He gave a small shrug, the kind lawmen give when they've already chosen their side. You know how these HOA things go? Hard to tell what's private, what's common. Maybe just let the civil court handle it. I stepped aside, motioning toward my yard. Come take a look before you decide. He followed, squinting through the rain. When he saw the stump and the gash in the hillside, his face tightened. That's quite a tree. Was I corrected? And now that slope's unstable. That tree's roots were holding up the whole ridge. She's about one storm away from owning a mudslide. He frowned. You threatening her, Ethan, I almost laughed. No, nature is. He didn't like that answer. He took a few photos with his phone, muttered something about paperwork, and promised to mediate. Then he trudged off toward Deborah's house, where she was already waiting on her porch under a giant floral umbrella. I stayed just long enough to hear her voice rise above the storm. He's making it up, Brad. The man's obsessed. He's filming me all the time. She wasn't wrong about that last part, but I had my reasons. After they left, I spent the rest of the day organizing my evidence. Video clips, photos, recorded audio. I even printed the city's environmental protection code highlighted in neon yellow. I wasn't letting this one slide. That night, I emailed the county environmental officer, Mark Dawson, including every file I had. Within an hour, he responded, "Thank you, Mr. Cole. This appears to be a violation of Section 8 to 213. I'll schedule a site inspection tomorrow morning." Finally, someone with sense. But Deborah wasn't done, not by a long shot. At 11 p.m., I noticed headlights flicker through my curtains. Peeking outside, I saw her pacing in the rain phone pressed to her ear, umbrella forgotten. I couldn't hear the words, but her gestures were frantic. She pointed toward my yard, toward the stump, toward the slope. The rain came harder. At midnight, thunder rolled again, and something in the distance cracked. Loud, heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Down by the bottom of the hill, I saw at the edge of Deborah's retaining wall had split open like a cracked tooth. Chunks of stone lay scattered in the mud. Water trickled from the gap, carrying clumps of soil and roots downhill. By morning, the crack had widened. Her backyard patio tilted slightly toward my fence, one corner sinking into the softened ground. And there, sitting proudly in the middle of it all, was the sheriff's cruiser parked exactly where it shouldn't be. I found out later Brad had come early that morning to check on things parked right beside the stump and decided to wait for the county inspector. The irony would have been poetic if it wasn't about to get violent. At 8:42 a.m., my security cameras picked up the environmental officer arriving in a white county truck. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, shaking his head at the damage. Deborah was on her patio, hair, frizzing face red. "See," she shouted over the rain. "His tree's roots were rotten. It caused this mess." Mark looked unimpressed. "Ma'am, records show you ordered its removal." "I did no such thing," she snapped. He tilted his tablet. "I have footage right here from Mr. Cole's security system. You were directing the contractors yourself." Her mouth opened, then closed. "That's when it happened." A low groan rolled through the air. The slope behind her yard shifted. Everyone turned. The remaining half of the trunk, heavy soaked, loosened by the downpour, tilted forward. I could almost see it in slow motion, the earth cracking the log, sliding, bouncing once, twice, then crashing down with an ear-splitting wham, directly onto the sheriff's car. Glass exploded. Metal screamed. The blue lights flickered to life, siren wailing briefly before sputtering out. Mud splashed across everyone within 20 feet. Mark Dawson leapt backwards, soaked and furious. Deborah screamed, stumbling into the mud in her pink slippers. Brad stood frozen, mouth open, staring at what used to be his cruiser. For a moment no one moved, just the hiss of rain on steel and the faint, tragic honk of the car's dying horn. Then I stepped forward, camera in hand, filming the whole thing. "Guess the tree was a hazard after all," I said, deadpan. Brad turned toward me, soaked and furious. "This isn't funny, Ethan, wasn't meant to be," I replied. "But it is justice." He radioed for backup, mumbling something about structural collapse. Deborah tried to stand, slipping twice, smearing her pink blazer in brown streaks. Within minutes, more deputies arrived, along with the county's damage assessment team. My front yard turned into a circus, yellow tape, flashing lights, and a dozen onlookers peeking through curtains. By noon, word had spread across the entire neighborhood. Phones buzzed, photos circulated, and someone posted a video to the HOA Facebook group titled "HOA President's Tree Disaster Crushes Sheriff's Car Instant Karma." Within hours, it hit 3,000,000 views. That afternoon, Mark Dawson pulled me aside. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "your footage shows everything. We'll file this as unlawful removal of protected vegetation plus property damage due to negligence. It's quite serious." "Serious enough for charges?" I asked. He nodded. At minimum fines, possibly civil liability. And given whose car that is, he glanced toward the flattened cruiser. Someone's going to have to explain that to the county. Deborah overheard her expression collapsing faster than her hillside. Wait, Mark, I didn't know. The contractors, they're cooperating, he interrupted. They said you gave the order. On video. Her face drained of color. That night, as the rain finally stopped, I sat on my porch with a beer watching the flashing lights fade one by one. The stump stood dark and soaked in the backyard, surrounded by police tape. Somewhere across the street, Deborah's house lights went out. The storm was over, or so I thought. What I didn't know yet was that the aftermath, the investigations, the insurance claims, the public humiliation was going to turn Oakview Hills upside down. Because once a Karen starts falling, she doesn't fall quietly. She takes the whole HOA with her. By sunrise the next day, the story had already grown legs. Someone's teenager had posted drone footage of the fallen tree and the crushed patrol car to TikTok, and within hours it hit over 100,000 views under the tag number HOKarma. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, half of them asking if it was real, the other half sending memes of trees in pink blazers. Meanwhile, the actual sheriff's department wasn't laughing. At 8:30 a.m., a convoy of county vehicles rolled into Oakview Hills, 2 deputies, a county inspector, and one very unhappy Sheriff Brad Hanlon, his cruiser still sitting in a puddle of humiliation glass scattered like confetti. He'd swapped uniforms for rain gear, but even under the slicker he radiated embarrassment. The kind that comes from being the punchline of the week. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching him step through the mud toward me. "Morning, Sheriff," I said, doing my best to sound civil. "Heard you had a rough night." His jaw tightened. "We're conducting an investigation into property damage, Ethan. Don't make it harder than it has to be." "I wouldn't dream of it. You want the footage, or should I send it straight to your insurance company?" He didn't answer that one. Instead, he waved over one of the deputies. "Secure the area. I want photos of everything, the stump, the slope, the patrol unit, everything." Behind him, Deborah Frost emerged from her house wearing what was clearly her version of humble attire, a beige raincoat over yoga pants, hair pinned back, face pale from what I assumed was a long night of damage control. She spotted me instantly. "Ethan, I hope you're happy," she called out, voice trembling. "Your tree destroyed county property." I sipped my coffee. "Funny, I thought your authorization destroyed my tree." "Don't get smart," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney." "Oh, I already did," I said. "He called this morning to ask if you'd actually lost your mind." Brad stepped between us, holding up a hand. "Enough. This is an active scene. Both of you calm down." He turned to me. "Did you or did you not install that tree illegally?" "Illegally," I raised an eyebrow. "Sheriff, that oak's been there since your grandparents were kids. I've got survey maps from 1931 proving it predates the subdivision." Deborah crossed her arms. "Well, maybe it was diseased. Maybe it was going to fall anyway." The county environmental officer, Mark Dawson, had just arrived, clipboard in one hand, drone controller in the other. He looked up from the slope. "Not diseased. I cut the cross-section myself. Healthy core, no rot. This was an intentional removal." Deborah blinked. "Intentional? What are you implying?" "That you ordered it, ma'am," he said, pulling a still frame from my video onto his tablet. It showed her pointing dramatically toward the tree while the chainsaws buzzed. Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish in distress. "That's taken out of context." Brad rubbed his temples. "Deborah, you told me last week you had county approval." "I thought I did," she snapped. "The HOA bylaws clearly say—" "HOA bylaws," Mark interrupted, "do not override county environmental law. Section 8 to 213 protects heritage trees over 50 years old. You didn't just break HOA rules, you broke state law." Silence. The kind that eats sound. Even Brad didn't speak for a moment. The deputies stopped taking photos. Rain dripped from the leaves above like an audience holding its breath. Finally, Deborah broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Well, surely this can be settled quietly." "A misunderstanding, right?" Mark tapped his clipboard. "You'll need to appear before the county review board, and you'll be liable for environmental fines and property restitution. The sheriff's department will file their own report for vehicle damage." She paled. "Vehicle, oh God, Brad, they can't blame me for that." He gave her a look colder than the rain. "That's my car, Deborah. You told me that stump was stable when I parked there." "I didn't know. How could I have known?" "Because I told you," I said calmly. "Yesterday morning. You called me a liar." Brad's eyes flicked between us, realizing finally how deep she'd dragged him. "I'll need statements from both of you." "Of course," I said. "You'll find mine in 1080 PhD with time codes." That earned me a glare, but I didn't care. By noon, the news vans had arrived. A local reporter from Channel 7 climbed out with a cameraman in tow. You could see the excitement in her eyes. Small-town scandal was blood in the water. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she chirped to Deborah, microphone extended. "We understand there's been an incident involving a protected tree and a sheriff's vehicle." Deborah blinked like a deer in headlights. "No comment." The reporter turned to me. "Sir, are you the property owner guilty as charged?" I said, though not as guilty as the person who cut it down. She smiled. "Would you say this is an example of HOA overreach?" "Oh, I'd say it's a case study," I replied. Chapter 1. How to Turn a Neighborhood Rulebook into a Weapon. Within hours, the clip hit the local evening news. My phone blew up again, neighbors sending laughing emojis, colleagues congratulating me for becoming the HOA whistleblower of the year. But beneath the humor, I felt something heavier. Relief, yes, but also anger. Because it shouldn't have taken a smashed patrol car to prove what was obvious from day one: power unchecked always collapses under its own weight. That night, while the storm clouds finally began to break apart, Brad came back alone. No lights, no deputies, just him and the soft crunch of boots on wet gravel. He stopped at the base of my porch. "Ethan, we need to talk." I set down my beer. "About your insurance deductible," he sighed. "Look, I know Deborah went too far, but if you push this publicly, it'll get ugly. Lawsuits, politics, you name it." "Sheriff," I said, evenly ugly, started when she trespassed on my property with chainsaws. "I'm not the one who has to worry about optics." He studied me for a long time, then muttered, "You always were stubborn, and you always were partial to the wrong people." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll file my report. But off the record, you didn't hear it from me. Her husband's old construction firm still has county contracts. This could get messy. I'm counting on it," I said. When he left, I walked back to the stump one more time. The moon broke through the clouds, silver light glinting off the splintered wood. It looked almost peaceful now, like the end of a battle, quiet but not forgotten. I could hear frogs starting to sing again in the marsh beyond the hill. The air smelled of renewal but also warning. Because even though the law was finally on my side, I knew Deborah wasn't done. She was too proud, too entitled, too obsessed with appearances to simply vanish in shame. Somewhere inside that mansion of hers, she was already scheming, calling lawyers, crafting narratives, rewriting history. People like her didn't apologize. They strategized. But I had patience. I had proof. And most importantly, I had momentum. By morning, Oakview Hills would no longer be hers to rule. Because when the sheriff's car went down with that tree, it didn't just crush steel and glass. It crushed her credibility. And that, I knew, was only the beginning of her real downfall. The next few days in Oakview Hills felt like the calm between two storms, only this time the weather wasn't the problem. It was gossip. It spread faster than mold on wet drywall. Every neighbor, from the retired dentist on Birch Lane to the stay-at-home yoga influencer 2 doors down, had something to say about the tree incident. By Monday morning, I couldn't even step outside without someone pretending to walk their dog just to get a peek at the crushed patrol car still sitting behind yellow tape. I'd overhear fragments of conversation every time I took the trash out. "Did you see Deborah's face on the news? I heard the sheriff tried to blame Ethan. No way, my cousin works at City Hall. She's toast." And in a rare moment of community unity, everyone agreed on one thing: karma had perfect aim. But karma wasn't done yet. That morning, a county engineering crew arrived to assess the slope. 3 men in reflective vests and mud-caked boots stood near the shattered stump, talking quietly. I wandered over, pretending to check my mailbox. One of them, a gray-haired man with a clipboard, looked up. "You, the homeowner, yeah. What's the verdict?" He sighed. "Not good. Those roots were holding up 40 feet of soil. Without 'em, the whole back embankment's losing structure. The ground's saturated. If it rains again this week, that retaining wall's not going to hold." I glanced up toward Deborah's house, where her picture-perfect patio hung precariously above the crack like a stage built on stilts. "And if it doesn't hold," he grimaced, "let's just say your HOA's going to need more than bylaws to fix it." By noon, the workers had installed measuring rods and sensors along the slope to monitor ground movement. I stood by my fence watching them work when Deborah came marching down her yard, umbrella in hand, face tight with fury. "Excuse me," she barked. "Who authorized this excavation?" The foreman didn't even look up. "County order, ma'am. Safety inspection." "Well, I didn't approve it," she snapped. The man chuckled. "Ma'am, you don't approve the laws of gravity either, but they still apply." I nearly choked, trying not to laugh. She turned her glare on me next. "You think this is funny, Ethan?" "Not at all," I said, raising my phone. "Just documenting the miracle of consequences." Her nostrils flared. "You're harassing me. I'm filming on my own property. But you're welcome to file another false report. Seems to be your hobby." She stormed off, muttering something about defamation. That evening, thunder rumbled again in the distance. Not a full storm, just teasing rumbles from the western sky. But after everything we'd been through, even the faintest thunder felt like a warning shot. Around 9 p.m., as I sat in my living room editing drone footage for evidence, I heard a faint crack. Not thunder this time, something closer, sharper. Then, another. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The slope behind Deborah's property was moving, slowly, like a great creature shifting in its sleep. The retaining wall bowed outward concrete, splitting at the seams. And then, without ceremony, it gave up. The wall crumbled in a dull roar, pouring debris and mud down the hill. A wave of brown sludge surged across her backyard, swallowing garden furniture and potted plants. One of her white lawn chairs actually surfed the mudslide for a good 30 feet before vanishing into the mess. I grabbed my camera again, filming every second. Water gushed through the broken slope, carrying soil rocks and shattered patio tiles. Her back deck listed to one side like a sinking ship. And right in the middle of it, all perched at the base of the slope where the cruiser still sat, was Sheriff Hanlon again. I didn't even know he was back, but apparently he'd been monitoring the situation. When I saw him through the sheets of rain standing near the caution tape, my stomach dropped. "Brad, move," I yelled from my porch. He turned just in time to see the second wave of mud break loose. It wasn't huge, but enough to send rocks and tree debris tumbling. One thick slab of trunk bounced down and slammed into the cruiser again. The impact knocked the car another few feet downhill, splattering mud up to the windows. Brad jumped aside, slipping into the muck, shouting curses that would have made a priest blush. From her deck, Deborah screamed, "Do something! Stop it!" as if anyone could stop gravity with a clipboard. The county engineers scrambled to higher ground. The sound of snapping roots echoed across the yard like gunfire. By the time it was over, the cruiser sat half buried, the slope carved open like a wound. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled slowly, heavily. This wasn't just karma anymore. This was the full invoice coming due. The next morning, news vans returned, twice as many this time. One of them even brought a drone crew. Reporters swarmed the area like seagulls at a landfill. I stayed quiet, leaning on my fence while they interviewed the county inspector. Officials confirm, one reporter said into her mic, that the unauthorized removal of a protected heritage tree directly caused this partial landslide, which resulted in property damage to both private and county assets. The HOA president, Mrs. Deborah Frost, could face civil penalties exceeding $50,000. That number hung in the air like perfume, sweet, sharp, and satisfying. Of course, Deborah wasn't going down without drama. When she saw the cameras, she stormed out onto her ruined deck, clutching a stack of papers in one hand and yelling, "This is harassment. That man is manipulating footage. I was acting under HOA authority." One of the reporters turned her mic toward Deborah. "Ma'am, your HOA's attorney says they have no record of such authorization." She froze mid-yell. The silence that followed was priceless. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hanlon stood off to the side, mud still caked on his boots, expression somewhere between humiliation and exhaustion. He caught my eye briefly, then looked away. That evening, the county issued a formal notice declaring the slope a hazard zone. Deborah's backyard was officially condemned until further stabilization. The HOA's insurance refused to cover the damage, citing unauthorized environmental interference. In other words, she was on her own. And that's when the real collapse began, not of soil, but of reputation. Neighbors who used to kiss her ring started avoiding eye contact. The HOA board called an emergency session. Whispers spread through the cul-de-sac about misused funds, fake maintenance invoices, even personal spending on community events that never happened. I didn't start those rumors, but I didn't stop them either. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department had officially filed a damage report naming Deborah Frost as the responsible party for the destruction of county property. The phrase "reckless negligence" appeared 3 times in the report. When I read it, I smiled for the first time in days. The next morning, as I left for work, I saw her standing by her mailbox in slippers holding a letter. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. It was the official notice of liability from the county plus a court summons. She saw me watching and snapped, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I walked up to the edge of my lawn and said quietly, "Not proud, just relieved." Then I pointed toward the stump behind me. "Funny thing about trees, Deborah, you can't cut out roots without the ground remembering." Her lip quivered. For a split second, she looked human. Then she turned and went inside, slamming the door hard enough to echo across the street. That was the last time she spoke to me directly. but the fallout was far from over. Because as satisfying as it was to see justice finally land, I knew the next act in this neighborhood drama was about to get even messier. HOA elections audits, and maybe just maybe a few buried secrets finally clawing their way to daylight. And for once I wasn't the one digging. If you'd told me a month earlier that my backyard would become the scene of a county investigation, 3 insurance claims, and a viral YouTube clip titled HOA Karen versus Gravity She Lost, I would have laughed. But by week's end, Oakview Hills wasn't just gossip fodder, it was a full-blown legal circus. The county environmental office cordoned off the slope with fresh tape. The sheriff's department filed its official incident report, which listed the cause of damage as unauthorized removal of stabilized vegetation, resulting in structural collapse. Translation: Deborah's crusade had literally brought the hill down, and now the insurance companies wanted blood. On Monday morning, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up adjusters, lawyers, investigators. They set up folding tables under pop-up tents, pulling files from waterproof binders while drones hovered overhead, taking aerial shots of the carnage. You'd think they were filming a crime scene. In a way, they were. I watched from my porch, trying not to grin as one of the adjusters, an older man with silver hair and a permanent frown, walked up to me. "Mr. Cole," he asked, flipping through his notes. "You're the property owner adjacent to the slope." "That's right." He nodded. "We've reviewed the footage. I have to say that video's one of the most comprehensive documentations I've ever seen. You should consider working for us." I smiled. "Thanks, but I prefer planting things to watching them fall apart." He chuckled, then gestured toward the ruined hillside. "You're aware Mrs. Frost submitted a counterclaim accusing you of negligence," I snorted. "Negligence? For owning a tree that survived 9 decades before she decided to play lumberjack." He smiled politely. "We're not taking it seriously. Between your time-stamped footage, the county ordinance, and the contractor's statements, let's just say her story doesn't hold up." I leaned against the porch rail. "So what happens now?" He sighed, scanning the scene. "Her homeowner's insurance won't cover self-inflicted damage. The HOA's policy excludes unlawful activity. That means, well, she's personally liable for all this." "Personally liable," I repeated, letting the words sink in like good music. "Yes, sir, including the sheriff's cruiser." I raised an eyebrow. Now that is poetic justice. Meanwhile, Deborah wasn't handling the spotlight well. The moment reporters stopped camping outside her house, she started filming herself. She uploaded a tearful Facebook Live rant titled "The Truth They Don't Want You to Know About Oakview Hills." In it, she wore sunglasses indoors and claimed she'd been sabotaged by a vindictive neighbor spreading misinformation. She said I'd manipulated drone footage, that I'd set her up, and that the tree had been already unstable due to soil disease. The comments section was brutal. "Lady, you hired the crew yourself. The only disease here is HOA power trips. You're crying in your Range Rover, ma'am. Nobody's feeling sorry for you." Within an hour, she deleted the video, but not before someone downloaded it and re-uploaded it to Reddit under r/HOA stories. It hit 1.2 million views overnight. I should have felt vindicated. But what I felt was something else: exhaustion. Vindication and peace aren't the same thing, I realized. Vindication's loud. Peace is quiet. And my neighborhood hadn't been quiet in weeks. Still, the investigation pressed on. The contractors Deborah had hired, 2 brothers from a small landscaping company, were subpoenaed for statements. I happened to see them again one afternoon, when the county investigators arrived to record interviews. They looked nervous but relieved. One of them, Jake Morales, recognized me. "Hey man, sorry about your tree," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We told her we needed county clearance. She said she was the clearance." "She told me that too," I said. "At least you've got it on video." He nodded. "Yeah, we gave the footage to the county. My lawyer said it's open and shut." "Good," I said. "She's been getting away with this too long." As the investigation deepened, more skeletons began crawling out of the HOA's file cabinets. Turns out Deborah's beautification fund was missing thousands of dollars in miscellaneous landscaping fees. A paper trail led straight to a contractor she'd personally approved, one who'd been billing for projects that didn't exist. When word hit the HOA board, it was chaos. I got the whole story from Patricia Lane, the assistant treasurer, a quiet widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. She showed up on my porch one evening, clutching a folder. "Ethan," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "you didn't hear this from me, but we did an emergency audit. The numbers don't add up. Deborah's been using HOA funds to pay for personal projects." "Personal projects?" Patricia nodded grimly. "Bathroom renovations, a new hot tub, even her lawn service." I let out a low whistle. Guess she believed in reinvesting in the community, her own community. Patricia almost smiled. The board's voting tomorrow to suspend her authority. She doesn't know yet. The next evening, the HOA held a closed session in the community hall. But in Oakview Hills, nothing stays closed. Half the neighborhood crowded outside the glass doors as muffled shouting echoed from within. When the doors finally opened, Deborah stormed out, face blotchy and pale. A few board members followed, looking like they'd just survived an exorcism. Patricia emerged last and walked straight to me. "It's done," she whispered. "Unanimous vote. She's out." The news spread like wildfire. By nightfall, the group chat was filled with confetti emojis and gifs of falling trees. Someone even updated the HOA website banner from Oakview Hills, a harmony of order, to Oakview Hills under new management. I slept better that night than I had in months. But Deborah, not so much. The next morning, she tried one last act of desperation, filing a complaint with the county accusing me of environmental sabotage. She claimed I deliberately weakened the slope to frame her. The county officer forwarded the email to me with a note that simply said, "Nice try." 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy, one who wasn't Brad, served her with official notice of civil penalties. The total damages $63,400. That included restoration costs, environmental fines, and vehicle damage. The deputy, apparently a fan of irony, delivered the notice while standing beside the crushed cruiser, still half buried in mud. When the paperwork hit her hands, Deborah went silent. No yelling, no excuses, just a quiet, defeated nod. That afternoon, movers arrived at her house. Not everything went, but the essentials did: boxes, clothes, her dog. By evening, her beloved white Range Rover rolled out of the neighborhood, leaving deep tire marks in the wet asphalt. I stood at my gate and watched her go. For once, she didn't look angry, just hollow. I thought that would be the end of it. But Oakview Hills has a memory like wet cement. Everything that happens here leaves an imprint. A week later, the HOA held a community cleanup event. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now shook my hand. Someone brought cookies shaped like trees. The new interim president, Patricia, approached me with a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled. "The board voted to name the new replanting initiative after your oak. We're calling it the Coal Tree Fund. County's even donating 2 saplings for restoration." I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note, handwritten, "For the man who stood his ground when the ground itself gave way." For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't bitterness, just quiet satisfaction. And as I looked at the muddy slope where roots once anchored the earth, I realized something. Deborah had built her empire on control, but control isn't the same as stability. Control snaps under pressure. Stability bends and endures. When you tear out the roots, you lose both. I took a deep breath, the smell of wet soil and pine filling the air. For the first time since the chainsaws started, I finally felt at peace. The storm was over. But the lesson, oh, the lesson, had only just begun. I thought the storm had passed, that Deborah's Range Rover vanishing down County Road 47 would mark the quiet end of the saga. But HOA stories never end cleanly, do they? They drag through every legal crack and gossip channel like roots through concrete. A week after her departure, I received a thick envelope from the county courthouse. Inside, a formal notice: civil hearing, Cole v. Frost. Apparently, Deborah had filed a counterclaim accusing me of defamation, emotional distress, and property sabotage. I actually laughed out loud. Property sabotage from the woman who ordered the chainsaws herself. I called my lawyer, Jim Sutton, a no-nonsense guy with silver hair and a permanent smirk who'd handled half the land disputes in our county. "Congratulations," Jim said when I explained. "You've officially reached HOA endgame." "Is that a legal term?" I asked. "It is now." He flipped through the paperwork. "She's bluffing. The evidence you've got, video timestamps, witness statements, kills her claim, but we'll countersue for full restitution and punitive damages. If she wants a fight, we'll give her one in the open." And that's how my quiet suburban feud turned into a courtroom drama. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning at the county courthouse, and the entire neighborhood seemed to know it. Patricia texted me, "Half of Oakview Hills is taking the morning off work." I showed up in my best Navy suit, pressed professional and paired with the calm smile of a man holding irrefutable evidence. Deborah arrived 15 minutes late in a beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses, as if anonymity could save her from notoriety. Her attorney, a young man who looked more terrified than prepared, kept whispering to her like someone trying to reason with a ticking bomb. The judge, Honorable Sarah Whitfield, took one look at the case files and sighed like she'd seen this play out 100 times before. "All right, folks," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's see who chopped down what." Jim presented first methodically, elegantly, with the precision of a surgeon. He laid out photos of the oak in its prime, the certified environmental protection documents, and the footage of Deborah ordering the workers to cut it. Then came the aftermath, the collapse, the mudslide, the crushed cruiser, the county fines, the HOA audit. When the video clip of her saying, "Then sue me," played in court, even the stenographer tried not to laugh. Deborah's defense was as thin as her patience. She claimed she'd been misled by contractors, and that Mr. Cole provoked hostility. Her lawyer tried to argue that I'd weaponized social media against her. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. "Ma'am, did you or did you not authorize the removal of the tree?" Deborah hesitated. I might have given verbal direction, but—" "So you did," the judge interrupted. "And you were aware of county regulations. I was under the impression HOA bylaws superseded county code," Deborah said meekly. Jim leaned in. "That's not how laws work, Your Honor." The courtroom chuckled. When it was over, the judge didn't even need time to deliberate. "Mrs. Frost," she said, her tone sharp as a gavel, "you are solely responsible for the unauthorized removal of protected property resulting in environmental and structural damage. You will compensate Mr. Cole in the amount of $8,500 plus legal costs. Furthermore, you are prohibited from contacting him or entering his property for 12 months. The gavel struck. Silence. Then just the faint shuffle of Deborah gathering her papers, her sunglasses hiding nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just nodded politely as she passed, because deep down I knew the worst punishment for a woman like Deborah wasn't the fine. It was public humiliation. Her reputation was gone, and in an HOA reputation is currency. When we stepped out into the sunlight, Jim clapped my shoulder. "You handled that with class. I've seen people go nuclear in these cases. I figured she'd implode without my help," I said. He laughed. "Fair enough. Go plant something, Cole. You've earned it." And that's exactly what I did. 2 weeks later, the county restoration crew arrived with a new oak sapling, 6 feet tall, strong trunk, deep roots wrapped in burlap. I'd used part of the restitution money to have the slope stabilized, reinforced with stone terracing and fresh soil. The crew helped me plant the young oak in the exact spot where its ancestor had stood. When we finished, Patricia and a few neighbors gathered to watch. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else handed me a small plaque. It read, "The Cole Oak. May its roots remind us that truth stands tall." I knelt, pressed the plaque into the soil, and felt something settle in my chest. Closure, maybe. Or peace. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. But Oakview Hills wasn't done cleaning house. A week later, the HOA board held another emergency meeting. Rumors had been swirling since the audit about Deborah's embezzlement, her private maintenance fund, even a mysterious HOA debit card used for office supplies at a luxury salon. I didn't plan to attend, but curiosity won. The meeting hall was packed. Patricia stood at the front beside a projector displaying financial statements. "We have confirmed," she said, voice steady, "that former President Frost redirected approximately $60 0 HOA funds to personal use over the last 2 years. Gasps, murmurs. Someone whispered. "That explains the marble countertops." Patricia continued. "Our attorney has coordinated with county officials. Mrs. Frost will face a separate criminal investigation for misappropriation of community funds." The room broke into quiet applause. In the back row, Richard Frost, Deborah's husband and former HOA treasurer, stood abruptly. His face was pale, jaw clenched. "I didn't know," he said quietly. She handled the accounts." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "We understand, Richard, but the board must move forward." Richard sighed, shoulders slumping. "Then I resign." He left without another word. That night, the community felt different, lighter, like the air had finally cleared after years of secondhand arrogance. I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, passing the young oak standing proud in my yard. The night breeze rustled its leaves, soft, alive, forgiving. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy stopped by. Not Hanlon, he'd quietly resigned too, after internal review found personal bias in case handling. This was Deputy Morrison, a calm, kind-faced man who actually listened. "Just wanted to let you know," he said, "the county finalized your restitution. You'll receive a check within 2 weeks. And good work keeping records. Most folks don't document anything until it's too late." "Thanks," I said. "I learned that the hard way." He smiled. "Seems like half the county learned something from your story." As he left, I looked toward Deborah's old house. It sat dark and empty, for sale signs swaying in the wind. The lawn had gone wild without her obsessive pruning, a perfect metaphor if there ever was one. For months, I'd seen that tree as a symbol of loss. Now it was something else. Proof that Root's truth, patience, and a stubborn refusal to give up run deeper than control or vanity. Sometimes justice doesn't come in sirens or gavels. Sometimes it falls from the sky in the form of a tree trunk landing on the right person's mistakes. That night I poured a glass of bourbon, stood by the window and raised it toward the sapling outside. To the oak that taught me how to stand tall, I said quietly. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just peace, and maybe the faintest smile at the thought that somewhere out there Deborah Frost was learning what it meant to live without roots. The first morning without HOA, flyers on my door felt almost eerie. For years, Deborah Frost's pink memos had been as reliable as sunrise warnings fines and the occasional passive-aggressive reminder about hedge height. Now silence. Just birds, and the rustle of my newly planted oak swaying gently in the spring wind. It had been 3 months since the court's ruling. The grass had grown thick and green again, and the slope behind my yard looked sturdier than ever. The county's restoration crew had reinforced it with limestone terraces and drainage pipes paid entirely by Deborah's restitution. I couldn't help but admire the irony. The woman who destroyed my tree ended up financing a stronger foundation than I ever could have built myself. Neighbors stopped by often those days not to complain but to chat. It felt strange at first, having people smile when they saw me instead of crossing the street. One afternoon, Patricia Lane and her grandson came over with a small box. Inside was a bronze plaque, polished and simple. Roots run deeper than rules. She smiled shyly. We thought you should be the one to place it. We mounted it on a small stone by the base of the new oak. As the sunset light reflected off the bronze like a quiet promise that peace could in fact return to Oakview Hills. Still, not everyone had found peace. About a month after the planting, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address made me freeze for a second. Frosty P.O., Box 228, County Correctional Division. I took it inside, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at it for a full minute before opening. Inside was a single handwritten page, neat, deliberate, almost too careful. Ethan, I suppose this is the part where you expect an apology. You won. Congratulations. The neighborhood adores you, the county worships your oak, and I'm the villain in every joke. Maybe I deserve that, maybe not. But I'll say this power is addictive. It makes you think you're protecting order when really you're protecting ego. I mistook control for respect. You reminded me what the difference looks like. Deborah, I sat there for a long time, letter in hand, feeling conflicted. For months I'd imagined her downfall with a kind of grim satisfaction. But reading that, seeing her handwriting so precise, so human, it hit differently. Vindication was cold. Closure, though, that was warm. I folded the letter and tucked it into the HOA bylaws binder she'd once weaponized. A perfect burial spot. Life moved on. The HOA, now under Patricia's leadership, transformed overnight. Meetings became community potlucks instead of interrogations. The first event she hosted was Oakview Replanting Day. Kids dug holes for new shrubs, old neighbors swapped stories, and for once laughter replaced tension. Someone even joked about making no chainsaws allowed the new motto. One of the new board members, Dale, pulled me aside. You ever think about running for president? I nearly choked on my lemonade. Me, no thanks. I've already seen what that throne does to people. He laughed. Maybe that's exactly why you should. I smiled but shook my head. I'll stick to my trees. They listen better. As weeks passed, the new oak grew fast, faster than I expected. Its leaves glimmered in the morning sun, catching light the way the old one used to. Birds nested in its branches. Squirrels came back. Even the soil smelled alive again. Every morning I'd stand by the fence, sip my coffee, and feel like the world had finally realigned itself. Then one quiet Sunday, a white sedan pulled up across the street. A woman stepped out dressed simply in jeans and a gray hoodie. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, her posture smaller. Then she turned and I saw her face. Deborah. She didn't come closer, just stood by her old mailbox, staring at the for sale sign still staked in her yard. We looked at each other for a few seconds. No words, no shouting, just silence. Then she raised her hand, not waving, not apologizing, just acknowledging. A brief nod, an unspoken truce. I returned it, and that was it. She got back in the car and drove away down County Road 47 until her taillights disappeared behind the trees. I never saw her again. That evening I sat under the oak with a beer watching the sunset through its branches. The light poured gold through the leaves, the air still, the neighborhood peaceful. I thought about everything that had happened, the noise, the anger, the humiliation, the rain, the tree crashing down on the sheriff's cruiser like divine comedy. I'd gone from quiet homeowner to accidental viral folk hero. But what stuck with me wasn't the spectacle. It was the lesson buried in the roots. We build walls, rules, committees, and bylaws to create order. But when we forget the why, when we enforce power just to feel important, those structures rot from within. Deborah wasn't born a villain. She became one the moment she valued control more than community. And in trying to prune others, she cut off her own roots. Nature doesn't negotiate. Gravity doesn't care about HOA titles. Justice, real justice, doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs patience, documentation, and a good foundation. Before heading inside, I took one last photo of the oak and posted it to the community page with a caption, 3 months later, peace and new roots. May we all grow from what fell. It got hundreds of likes and a few dozen comments. One of them, from Patricia, simply read, "This time, the right thing took root." And for the first time since this madness began, I realized the story wasn't about revenge at all. It was about growth, the kind that happens only after everything else collapses. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's that patience beats rage every time. You can't out-yell arrogance, but you can outlast it. People like Deborah think control is power, but real power is calm, persistence, truth on your side, and the courage to stand your ground when everyone else bends. When someone tries to cut you down, let your roots, your integrity, your evidence, your faith speak for you. Because truth doesn't fall. It waits, it weathers, and eventually it grows back stronger. So if you're watching this, remember, document everything, stay calm, and never let a Karen or anyone make you doubt what's rightfully yours. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever faced an HOA nightmare like this? And if you believe karma always finds its target, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there's plenty more where this came from.